Hi, hope all of you are doing well. So let us now get started with active and passive voices. Uh, Before I can start, can you please confirm if you're able to hear me properly? So post that, let me continue with the topics. Please post it in the comment section. Also, we might be having loads to cover. It would be great if you can respond to me on the chat option after every subtopic that we cover under active and passive voices so that I can get to know that you have understood the topic. Can you please acknowledge if you are able to hear me properly? So you can post a comment in the option which is given to you in the portal. Okay, hoping you have unmuted yourself. I didn't hear back from any of you. Anyways, I'll get started because it is already quite some time. Okay, cool. At least one person responded. Okay, cool. So yes, we are, or we should be talking about active and passive voices. So first, let us go through the essential topics of active and passive voices and understand where these are used and how these can be tackled so that we can, crack interviews or crack the aptitude tests, wherein a few questions will belong to active and passive voices. So these are basic rules that active and passive voices will follow, and for every rule, it is directly proportional, or it is directly dependent on the tenses that we use, right? So, what is an active voice? So, active voice is a form or set of forms of a verb in which the subject is typically the person or thing performing the action and which can take a direct object. Okay, so we are explaining what the subject is trying to perform or what is the action that he wishes to perform. Okay, so this is what an active voice is. So, what is passive voice? Passive voice is again a set or a set of forms of a verb in which the subject undergoes the action of the verb. Something like example, they were killed, as opposed to the victim from they were killed as opposed to the active form he killed them. Okay, so he killed them would be something active, wherein the verb which is being highlighted is from the subject if it is active, which is he killed them. But if you are going to a passive voice, they were killed. So killed is the action, whereas the subject undergoes the action of the verb, right? So hence active and passive voices are two different forms of a verb. Okay, so basically in the first one, subject is, yeah, so the subject is performing the action, whereas in passive it is the form of a verb in which the subject undergoes the action. So that is the only difference. So first, what are the rules that we need to understand if active and passive voices need to be defined? So just consider present simple tense. So what is present simple tense before we can understand the idea of what active and passive voices in different tenses. So present simple tense is used for actions which is happening right now, or when it keeps happening regularly. So depending on the person, the simple present tense is formed by using the root form or by adding s or es to the end. Okay, so basically simple present tense is a situation when an action is happening right now or which keeps happening regularly. So let's say for an active voice, these are the formulas that can be used to portray when the subject and the object, the relationship between them is defined by particular verbs plus the tenses with which they are united. So for active voice, subject comes first, as the definition says, and then the verb, and then followed by the tenses, which is defining when the action is being taken on the object. Okay, likewise. So just like how passive voice defines, so subject is being acted upon. So hence the object is coming in the first, then followed by is, am, and are, followed by the auxiliary verb, and then the subject. So hence first comes the object and then the subject. Subject is being actioned on by the object. So likewise, we can have different forms of active and passive voices based on the different words that we use to connect. For example, the second one. So the subject comes first, as usual in an active voice, and then comes do or does. It can be does or does not. Then followed by the verb, which is defining the action, and then the object. So action on the object. So likewise in passive voice, object will be first, and then the auxiliary verbs, followed by the action being performed, if it is happening or not happening, by the subject. So that is passive voice. So if you are questioning, so let's say you are questioning, and for an active voice, does the subject followed by the verb, which is the action being performed, followed by the object. So since in a passive voice, object needs to come in the first, and since the subject is being actioned upon, so we will be considering is or am or are in the beginning of the sentence, followed by the object, and then the auxiliary verb, which is defining the action on the subject. So example for active voice, he reads a novel. So here, novel is the object and verb is defined by read. He is the subject. So the same thing which has to be converted to a passive voice. Example, a novel is read. So the object is coming first and then the action being performed. So this is active and passive voice rules for present simple tense. So you can let me know if there are any questions for the present simple tense. Any questions? Giving you 30 seconds before I can move to the next rule of active and passive voices. Okay. Malvika says explain example of passive voice. And then it is reads, that is defining the action that he's performed, which is the verb, and then comes the object, which is the novel. Okay, so in passive voice, so the same thing inverted to a passive voice, a novel is read. Okay, so novel is the object, read is the verb. So you are adding an auxiliary verb which is. So a novel is read. However, we haven't defined the subject in here, so you can also define the subject. So a novel is read by him, so him will be the subject. Okay, so object novel, and then followed by an auxiliary verb that you're using, which is. So you're then defining the action, which is read. So here in the example, the subject is not mentioned, but let us mention it. A novel is read by him. So him becomes the subject. Anything else? Shall we go to the next rule? Okay, hoping that Malavika has understood the example. So let me move to the next rule. Here we go. So present continuous tense. So last time it was simple tense. Now it is present continuous tense. So what is present continuous tense before we understand this rule? So present continuous tense indicates that an action or condition is happening now. It can also be happening frequently and can continue in the future. Can continue in the future. So we have active and passive voices that can be given in continuous tense, present continuous tense to be more specific. So for active voice, the formula would be as usual, since the subject comes in the beginning for the active voice. So subject comes first, and then is or am or are, followed by the verb, and the verb is attached with the continuous tense, which is ing. Running, lofting, drinking, writing. Write is the verb and ing, so it is defining the continuous tense. So subject plus is or am or are, then followed by the verb, which is attached to the continuous tense, and then followed by the object. This is active voice. Then comes passive voice, and as usual, object needs to be coming in the beginning and then followed by is or am or are, which is the auxiliary verb, and then comes being. So the auxiliary verb is to be attached with being, which is defining the continuous tense, followed by verb, which is defining the action by the subject. So subject comes in the last. Likewise, if we are considering contrary sentences, so which includes not, the subject plus is or am or are, followed by not, and then followed by the verb attached to the continuous tense, which is ing, and then the object. So in passive voice, it is object coming first, and then is or am or are, which is auxiliary verb, and then followed by not being. So this is the opposite or contrary of the first one, because it is not. As in, we are seeing the opposite, or we are saying that the action is not happening, not being. Being, which is being referred to for the continuous tense, followed by the verb, acting verb, on the subject in the last. So if we are asking a question, so the same auxiliary verb is or am or are comes in the first, followed by the subject. Since as per active voice, subject needs to be in the beginning, or subject is acting upon an object. The subject is acting, the verb is acting part. So it is in the continuous tense, hence it is in the ing form, followed by the object. This in a passive voice form, again we are using the auxiliary verb is the am or are, followed by the object, and then the acting verb, followed by the subject. So examples for active voice. So Isha is singing a song. So this is in the present continuous tense, followed by the object, Okay, hoping all of you could hear what I was saying because I had a network issue. Now I think I should be back. So, did you all follow what active and passive voice rules are for present continuous tense, or do you want me to repeat it again? Would you want me to repeat it again? Please acknowledge before I can go ahead with the next topic. So, first it was the present simple tense. Now we spoke about present continuous tense, the various formulas that can be used. So if we are done, we can go ahead with the next one. So I'm giving you 30 seconds before I can move with the next topic. Please let me know if you have anything to ask by then. Only 30 seconds, please. Okay, hoping no one has any questions around this. Let me move quickly to the next rule. So first it was present simple tense, then it was present continuous tense. So what is present perfect tense? So present perfect tense, it is actually a grammatical combination of the present tense and perfect aspect that is used to express a past event that has present consequences. So basically, event that has already happened in the past, and this, and because it has happened in the past, it has present consequences. So again, the present perfect is a grammatical combination of the present tense and perfect aspect that is used to express a past event that has present consequences. So let us go through the rules for present perfect tense. So active voice, subject comes first and then has or have, which is defining the present perfect tense, followed by the verb, which is mentioning the action, and then the object. Likewise, for passive voice, first comes object, then has or have, which is the auxiliary verb, followed by been, which is defining present perfect tense, helping out the actioning verb V3 attached to the subject. So, if we are considering contrary sentences, so we can add a not. So, subject first, then has or have, which is defining a present perfect tense, followed by not, since it is a contrary sentence, followed by the actioning verb, and then the object. So, likewise, If we are considering contrary for passive voice, again not is added, and everything else is same for the other aspects, as in first object, then has or have, which is defining the auxiliary verb attached with been, but here it is not been because it is contrary, followed by the actioning verb, followed by the subject. So, in cases where we have questions to be asked, so first comes the auxiliary verb in an active voice, which is has or have, and then comes the subject followed by acting verb, and then the object, question mark. So, has or have the auxiliary verb, which is ideal to ask questions in the present perfect tense. So passive voice has or have again comes in the beginning, which is an auxiliary verb, followed by the object, then defining been, which is in the present perfect tense, followed by actioning verb, and then the subject. So for example, for an active voice, Nitesh has challenged her. So Nitesh will be the subject, has will be the auxiliary verb, challenged will be the acting verb on the object. Object will be her. So example for a passive voice. She has been challenged by Nitesh. So she is the object, has been will be the auxiliary verb. Challenged will again be the actioning verb by subject. Subject which is who is Nitesh. So this is for present perfect tense. So any questions for this? So if there are no questions, giving you 30 seconds before I can start or go ahead with the next topic. I mean, the next rule that can be followed. Giving you 30 seconds. Okay, moving ahead with the next rule, which is very simple again, simple tense in the past. So what is past simple tense? So past simple tense is used to refer to actions that are being completed in a time period before the present time. So in the simple past, the process of performing the action is not important. So the action may have already been in the recent past or a long time ago. Giving it to you again, the past simple tense is used to refer to actions that were completed in a time period. So this time period need not be in the present. So this So in such cases, the active and passive voice rules for past simple tense. So for active voice, first comes subject, then the acting verb, and then the object. So for passive voice, auxiliary verb comes between the object and the subject, added by the acting verb. So first comes the object, then comes the auxiliary verb, was or were, followed by the action, which is defining what is being performed by the subject in the last for passive voice. So considering contrary sentences, subject plus did not, followed by the acting verb, followed by the object. So likewise for passive voice, object comes in the first, then comes the auxiliary verb, followed by not, since it is contrary, followed by the acting verb, and then the subject. So if you are asking questions, so auxiliary verb comes in the first for an active voice, and then the subject, then the acting verb, followed by the object, and then a question mark. For passive voice, it will be was or were, which is the auxiliary verb in the beginning, followed by the object, unlike active voice, then the actioning verb on the subject. So, for example, Rima cleaned the floor. So, Rima is the subject, cleaned will be the action that is performed. So, this is in the past simple tense. It means that the uh, action has already been completed. So, what is being actioned on? The floor. Hence, the floor is the object. So, the same thing in a passive voice. The floor was cleaned by Rima. So the floor is the object, then the auxiliary verb, which is was, cleaned, which is defining the action that was performed by the subject being Rima. So this is for past simple tense. The rule for active and passive voices for past simple tense. Any questions? Giving you 30 seconds before I can move to the next rule. We have a few more rules and then we can get started with an activity wherein you will have to attempt a test. Okay, moving to the next topic, hoping there are no questions around how much ever we have discussed until now. So moving to past continuous tense, and before we can move to past continuous tense, let us the rules basically. So let us understand was what past continuous tense means. So this is a verb form that combines past tense and present tense in a single sentence. And the present. So this is what past continuous tense means. So let us understand what uh, the rule for active voice would be in case of past continuous tense. First comes the subject, then comes was or were, which is the auxiliary verb, followed by the acting verb in the ing form since it is continuous, then followed by the object. However, in passive voice, first comes the object, then the auxiliary verb, which is attached with being, which is referring to a continuous tense, followed by the acting verb, and then the subject. So, if we are considering the contrary for this, so subject comes first, then was or were, the auxiliary verb, which is attached with not, defining it as contrary, followed by the verb in the continuous form, hence the ing, which is added for the action, and then the object, the action being acted on. So the same in passive voice, first comes the object, then comes the auxiliary verb, which is attached with not being because it is contrary, and then the acting verb, and then the subject. So if we were to ask a question in the past continuous tense for an active voice, so let us see how it goes. So was or were will be the auxiliary verb which is coming in the beginning, which will be helpful for us to bring out the question format for an active voice. Was or were followed by the subject, then the verb in the ing form since it is continuous, followed by the object question mark. So the same thing in passive voice. So was or were, and then the object, and then being, which is defining the continuous tense. So the auxiliary verb comes right in the beginning in both the cases for active and passive voices. So for passive voice, auxiliary verb plus object plus being defining continuous tense plus the action and then the subject. So for example, in an active voice, Nikita was painting the wall. So Nikita being the subject, wall being the object, was being the auxiliary verb, and then painting is the action in the continuous tense. And the example for passive voice, the wall was being painted by Nikita. So wall again, the object was being combining both auxiliary verb and the continuous tense. Painted defining the action, which is V3 verb being performed by the subject being Nikita. So this is past continuous tense. So do we have any questions around this? So if not, let us go ahead with the next uh, rule. Giving you 15 seconds, hoping there are no questions, basis no questions being asked. Okay, so hoping no questions around this, let me move quickly to the next rule. Past perfect tense is our next rule that can be used in an active and passive voice format. So before we can go to the rules, let us walk through what past perfect tense is. So past perfect is used to talk about actions that were completed before some point in the past. So these were already completed at some point in the past. The past perfect is for talking about something that happened before something else. Hence, so the past perfect is an action that was already performed a while ago, or maybe a long time ago. So let us walk through the rules for active and passive voices using the auxiliary verbs, the subjects, the objects, and the acting verb. So first comes subject, then the auxiliary verb, and then the action followed by the object in an active voice, since subject is in the beginning. So for passive, first comes object, then comes had been, which is the auxiliary verb followed by the action and verb on the subject. Subject is in the last. So hence the action is being performed first, as mentioned. So if you are considering the contrary for first rule, so subject had not, so it is depicting the contrary, followed by the actioning verb on the object. The same in passive voice, object comes first and then had not been, defining contrary in terms of auxiliary verb followed by the action by subject. Action being performed by the subject. So the same format, if it has to be a question in terms of an active voice, had comes first, which is the auxiliary verb, and then the subject, then the action verb followed by the object. Question mark. The same in terms of passive voice. Again, the auxiliary comes in the beginning, then the object, been, which is mentioned here, defining past perfect tense. So had in here is defining the past, whereas been is defining the perfect tense. We spoke about the past perfect tense and the rules for the active and passive voice in this tense. So hoping you didn't miss except for the examples. So let me give you the example. Misha had cleaned the floor. Misha being the subject, had being the auxiliary verb, which is attached to the action being performed, which is cleaned, floor being the object. And again, in terms of passive voice, the same example in active can be returned to passive, floor being the object, had been, which is defining the past perfect tense. Cleaned, defining the action by the subject. So hoping you have no questions around this, and if we can move to the next rule, I'll be giving you 15 seconds to make sure that you don't have any questions around this, and let me move ahead. Okay, so next, let us go through further rules. So active and passive voice rules for future simple tense. So even before we can go ahead with the rules, so let us know what future simple tense is. So future simple tense is used to talk about things that haven't happened yet. So it is used to talk about an action or condition that will begin and end in the future. So both the beginning and the ending is in the future. So this is what future simple tense is. And if we are considering the rules that can be followed, first comes the subject, then will. So will being the auxiliary verb supporting the action, which is V1, followed by the object. Object defining what the subject is doing. So the same in passive voice. First comes object, then comes will be. So since it is in the future, the auxiliary verb supporting any future simple tense event, followed by the action which is taken by the subject. So the same in contrary for active and passive voices. First comes subject will not, defining contrary, followed by the action V1, actioning verb, followed by the object. Further, in passive voice terms, object first will not be, defining contrary, and then the subject. Followed by questions being asked. So, will followed by the subject, and then the action on the object. So, this in the passive form. So, will coming in the beginning, which is defining the passive voice form for future simple tense, future specifically. and then the action which is being performed by the subject. So, for example, so Kriya will sew the bag. So, the action which is set to perform or might be performed in future by Kriya is sew. Kriya being the subject, will defining the auxiliary verb, sew defining the action, and object being the bag. The same in passive voice will be the bag will be sewed by Kriya. So first the object, then will be defining the auxiliary verb, saying it is in the future simple tense, and the action which is sewing by the subject. So Kriya is the subject here. So this is active and passive voice rule for future simple tense. So giving you 15 seconds in case you have any questions around this, you can let me know. And if not, I will move ahead with the next rule. We have only a few more rules left. Just hold tight. Let us get done with it and then start with a small test that can be taken up to understand how well we have implemented the active and passive voice rules for different tenses, both past, present, and future. Okay, so hoping there are no questions around this, let me get going with the next tense. So we were done with future simple tense. So let us now understand what future perfect tense is. And before going ahead with the rules, let us understand what future perfect tense is by its meaning. So future perfect is a verb form or construction used to describe an event that is expected or planned to happen before a time of reference in the future. So, for example, I will have finished by tomorrow. So, the future perfect is nothing but an event that is expected or planned to happen before a time of reference. So, we are stuck to timelines again here in terms of future perfect. So, what are the rules that can be used if we are wanting to learn in terms of active and passive voices? So, active voice will have, which is defining the auxiliary verb, giving a future perfect meaning, followed by the action, and then the object. First comes the subject. The same in the passive voice will be object will have been, giving you a future perfect tense meaning for the sentence using will have been followed by the action being performed by the subject being in the last. The same in the contrary, subject plus will have not, defining contrary of auxiliary verb in the future perfect tense, the action, and then the object. So the same in passive voice, first comes the object, then will have not been, followed by the action, followed by the subject. So if you are asking a question So this is again dependent on the auxiliary verb in the future perfect tense, will coming in the beginning, making it a question, followed by the subject, plus have, followed by the actioning verb V3, and then the object question mark. The same in passive voice, will plus object plus have been, followed by the actioning verb V3 being performed by the subject question mark. Example: they will have brought the toy. They being the subject will have, defining future perfect tense, auxiliary verb, brought being the actioning verb V3, toy the object. The same in passive voice can be the toy will have been brought by them. So the toy being the object will have been, defining auxiliary verb in the future perfect tense, brought the action by them, so them being the subject. So this is in the passive voice form. So hence active and passive voice rule for future perfect tense is what we went through until now. So any questions? If not, I will move ahead with the next rule, giving you 15 seconds before you can confirm with yourself if you have no questions. Okay. So hoping there are no questions around this. We have a few more, a very few more, and then we can jump to taking up the test. So here we go with the next one. So what are the uses of passive voice? So why do we need passive voice? So it is used when the actor needs to know the job. So in this case, by is used in passive voice. So the actor needs to know the job. Actor who's the subject needs to know the action. So this is when passive voices can be used, and then it is used if it doesn't need to know the perpetrator work. I mean the perpetrator work. Sorry. So it is used if it doesn't need to know the perpetrator work. So what is a perpetrator? In case you are confused. So it is a so it is used if we don't know or forget who the perpetrator work is. So who has performed this work? If you need to know who it is, then we can't use a passive voice. So we are direct with the question, who did this? Example. So next, it is used if we are more interested in the job than the actors who work. You're only interested in the job, but not the actors who are actioning on the same. So it is used to avoid an awkward sentence or inappropriate with grammar. So if you are wanting to tell something to someone in a smooth, sweet, soft way, so you can use passive voice, which is again helping you to avoid an awkward sentence or inappropriate with grammar. So this is the uses of passive voice. So how changes occur in pronouns when active is becoming a passive voice? So in active voice and passive voice, if it is I, it becomes me. If it is we, it becomes us. If it is you, it is still staying you. If it is he, it is him, it is she. If it is she, it is her. If it is it stays the same. If it is they, it becomes them. So what you need to know is it is the same in the contrary to. If you just inverse it, in case you are wanting to uh, know the changes that is being occurred when passive to active to. So these are the changes which is occurred when you are wanting to change an active to passive voice. So tenses which cannot be converted into passive voice from an active voice. So present perfect continuous tense. So it shows that something started in the past and is continuing at the present too. So the present perfect continuous is formed by using the construction has or have been plus the present participate. Okay, so the ing form, because it is continuous, again is being used. So the next tense which cannot be converted, the past perfect continuous tense. So it is a verb tense that indicates something that began in the past, continued in the past, and also ended at a defined point in the past. So all of them are past events. Keeping that in mind, this cannot be converted into passive voice. The next, future perfect continuous tense. So this is a verb tense that indicates actions that will continue up until a point in the future. So the future perfect continuous consists of will have been and then the verb's present participle. So we are using ing form again since it is continuous. So this is future perfect continuous tense, sentences inactive which are in the future perfect continuous tense cannot be converted to a passive voice. The next comes future continuous tense. So it is a tense that indicates that something will occur in the future and continue for an expected length of time. So it is something which will occur in the future and will continue for an expected time length. So it is formed using the construction will be plus the present participle, the verb in the ing form. That is what a present participle is. So these tenses cannot be converted into passive voice. Next, intransitive verb cannot be changed to passive voice. So what is intransitive and transitive verb? So transitive verb needs an object in the sentence to give complete meaning, while intransitive verb does not need an object to give complete meaning in the sentences. Example, he sent a letter. So here, sent is a transitive verb as it needs an object, that is letter, to express the full meaning. So here you can observe that it is a transitive sentence. He loves. So love is an intransitive verb and does not need an object for expressing the full meaning. So the sentences having intransitive verbs cannot be changed into passive voice because there is not any objects in such sentences, just like how the definition mentions. So and without object in sentence, passive voice is not possible. For example, he is sleeping, he has gone, so he died in 2005. So we don't have objects in here. So it is only the subject and an intransitive verb. So these are the basic rules that you can keep in mind when you are attempting an active and passive voice format. Hoping you have no questions, giving you 30 seconds. And if you have any questions, you can go ahead ask me. Not 30 seconds, let me give you maybe 40 seconds. Let me know if you have any questions, and post that I will give you a test which you can take up. Finish it in 25 minutes. Sorry, finish it in 20 minutes, more than sufficient for you to understand how much you have learned. So here is the link. You just have to copy and paste it in your notepad, and your time will end exactly at 4:29. So the last 1 minute, let us give more space for you have 19 more minutes left. Make sure you are finishing it in time. In the meantime, you can also ask any questions you might be having in the same comment section so that I can take it up. We can try going about it and let us solve it together. You have 14 minutes left. So in 14 minutes, hoping you can complete a 20 question test. In the meantime, you can also keep me posted if you are having any issues or any doubts about uh, active and passive voices. You have exactly 10 more minutes, and in 10 more minutes, we can wrap up the session. You can also reach out to me on LinkedIn if you're having any questions. In case you're not able to reach out to me in the chat box, so here you go. I'm available anytime. Just drop a message. So you have 7 more minutes before you can wind it, and then we can understand if you have done your best. We nearly have 3 more minutes left to consider this as our last chance to understand anything that we have not understood. So please make use of the bestest of time. I haven't received any responses yet. So it is 4:29. If you are taking it up, please take it up seriously because it might be really helpful. The questions that I've used are specifically from the advanced medium, wherein these are the ones that you will get during your competitive exams or uh, interview questions too. So make sure that you are taking this up on a serious note. Also, it is 4:30. Hoping